September 1944. A Spitfire limps back to base with half its rudder torn away. The pilot lands hard, alive but shaking. Ground crew swarms the wreckage. One man kneels by the tail, tracing burn marks with his finger. He's been watching this happen for months. Pilots returning with control surfaces shredded. Some don't return at all. Command says it's combat damage. He knows better, and he's about to break every rule in the manual to prove it. RAF Station Culmhead sits low in the Somerset Hills, wrapped in morning mist that never quite burns off. It's the kind of cold that seeps through leather and wool, settling into bones and rivets alike. The airfield hums with the mechanical symphony of war. Merlin engines coughing to life. The metallic clang of ammunition belts being loaded. The sharp scent of high-octane fuel mixing with wet grass and engine oil. This is September 1944. The Allies have landed in France. The war is moving east, but the air battle over the Channel remains savage. Focke-Wulf 190s still prowl the coast. Messerschmitt 109s dive from altitude, guns blazing. And Spitfires, sleek, beloved, legendary, are dying in ways that don't make sense. Flight Lieutenant Marcus Hale has flown 32 combat sorties. He's 23 years old. His logbook is stained with oil and tea. He's lost 3 wingmen in 6 weeks. 2 were shot down cleanly. The third spun into the Channel after his rudder detached mid-turn. No enemy contact, no flak. Just a violent shudder, then the spiral. Hale reported it. So did others. The official line from Engineering Command was clear. Combat stress. Pilot error. Acceptable loss margins within operational parameters. The Spitfire was the pride of the RAF. Its reputation was untouchable. Any suggestion of structural failure was treated as defeatism or incompetence. But on the ground, in the maintenance hangars where daylight filters through oil-streaked windows, one man isn't buying it. Sergeant Eric Calloway is 31. Too old for combat flight, too stubborn for desk duty. He spent 12 years as an airframe fitter, most of it on Hurricanes and Spitfires. His hands are scarred from sheet metal and hydraulic fluid. His coveralls are bleached white in patches from solvent. He doesn't fly the planes. He keeps them alive. And lately he's been keeping count. 9 Spitfires lost in 8 weeks. 4 attributed to enemy fire. 3 listed as pilot error. 2 classified as unknown mechanical failure. Calloway has walked the wreckage of every one that made it back. He's catalogued fractures, stress points, and burn patterns that don't match cannon fire. He's measured control surfaces down to the millimeter, and he's found something no one wants to hear. The rudder assembly is failing under sustained high-G maneuvers, not from enemy damage, from physics. The Spitfire's rudder is fabric-covered, lightweight, elegant. It's controlled by cables running the length of the fuselage, tensioned to absurd precision. In level flight, it's flawless. In a screaming dive or a snap turn at 400 miles per hour, the aerodynamic forces spike. The fabric ripples, the cables stretch. And sometimes, under just the right or wrong conditions, the rudder tears itself apart. Calloway has written 3 reports, all ignored. He's spoken to squadron engineers. They nod politely and do nothing. He's requested a meeting with the station engineering officer. Denied. The Spitfire is proven. The Spitfire is perfect. And a sergeant with grease under his nails doesn't get to rewrite doctrine. So he stops asking permission. Late at night, after the last sortie lands and the crews stagger off to sleep, Calloway returns to the hangar. He brings a torch, a notebook, and a set of tools wrapped in canvas. He chooses a Spitfire that's due for routine inspection. Tail number QVL. Pilot. Flight Lieutenant Hale. He doesn't sabotage it, he reinforces it. Using scrap aluminum from a damaged hurricane, he fabricates a thin reinforcement brace for the rudder hinge. It's barely 2 pounds. It sits flush against the existing structure, invisible unless you know where to look. He drills 6 new rivets, each one placed to distribute stress without adding drag. The modification takes 4 hours. When he's done, he steps back and stares at his work under the flicker of a single bulb. It's unauthorized, unsanctioned. If it fails, he'll be court-martialed. If it works and anyone finds out, he'll be court-martialed anyway. He writes nothing down. He tells no one. He walks back to his billet as the first light touches the eastern sky. If you want more such stories, like and subscribe so these lives aren't forgotten. Eric Calloway grew up in Coventry, the son of a toolmaker. His father ran a small shop that made precision parts for textile looms. The work required patience, trigonometry, and an eye for tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. Eric learned to read blueprints before he learned to read maps. He could identify metal by touch and temper by sound. He joined the RAF in 1932, back when the service was small and the aircraft were biplanes with open cockpits. He loved the machines more than the missions. He loved the logic of load and lift, the poetry hidden in stress curves and center of gravity calculations. He wasn't romantic about flight. He was religious about function. By 1940, he was a senior airframe fitter at RAF Hornchurch, deep in the blood and chaos of the Battle of Britain. He worked 20-hour shifts, patching bullet holes and replacing shattered canopies. He saw hurricanes land with wings held together by hope and fabric dope. He saw pilots climb out of cockpits streaked with their own blood and ask when the plane would be ready again. He learned something during those months that no manual taught. Aircraft don't fail randomly. They fail predictably. Metal fatigues, cables fray, rivets crack in patterns. If you pay attention, if you track the wear and listen to the complaints pilots are too tired to articulate clearly, you can see failure coming. And if you see it coming, you can stop it. But seeing isn't enough. Not in a military machine built on hierarchy and procedure. Innovation from the bottom is tolerated only when it's convenient. A sergeant can suggest. He cannot decide. Calloway had tried the proper channels before. In 1942, he identified a fuel line vulnerability in the Hurricane Mark WWII. He'd documented 3 cases of post-combat fuel leaks that resulted in cockpit fires. He wrote a report with diagrams and recommended a rerouting fix that would take 30 minutes per aircraft. His commanding officer thanked him and filed the report. 2 weeks later, a hurricane caught fire on the taxiway. The pilot survived with third-degree burns. Calloway's report was never mentioned. He learned then that being right isn't enough. Proof isn't enough. You need authority, or you need results so undeniable that authority has no choice but to listen. So, when he saw the pattern in the Spitfire rudders, he didn't write a report. He built a solution, quietly, carefully, alone. He chose Hale's aircraft deliberately. Hale was aggressive in the air, known for high-speed reversals and snap turns that made other pilots wince. If the rudder was going to fail, it would fail under Hale's hands, and if the brace worked, it would work under the worst conditions imaginable. Calloway didn't tell Hale. He couldn't. Hale would have been obligated to report it. The modification would have been removed. Calloway would have been disciplined, and pilots would keep dying. So he stayed silent and waited. The problem wasn't new. It was just invisible. Spitfires had been in service since 1938. Thousands had been built, hundreds lost. The design had been refined through a dozen variants. Engineers at Supermarine had ironed out engine cooling issues, fuel tank vulnerabilities. and wing flutter. The Spitfire was a known quantity. Its strengths and weaknesses were catalogued, but war changes aircraft faster than engineers can track. In 1940, Spitfires flew at 15,000 feet, engaging bombers in steady, predictable intercepts. By 1944, they were hunting fighter bombers at wave-top height, then climbing to 30,000 feet in minutes, then diving back down in screaming pursuits that pushed every rivet and spar to its limit. The combat profile had shifted, the stresses had multiplied, and the airframe, unchanged in certain critical ways, was beginning to fracture. The rudder problem wasn't dramatic. It didn't announce itself. There was no catastrophic snap, no sudden explosion, just a gradual, invisible degradation. Cables stretched a few millimeters, fabric wrinkled under load, hinges flexed slightly out of tolerance, and then, in the middle of a hard turn at 400 miles per hour, the rudder would shudder. Sometimes it recovered, sometimes it didn't. Pilots reported mushy controls, sluggish response, a weird flutter on the tail. None of it was specific enough to ground an aircraft. None of it matched known failure modes, so the reports were logged and dismissed. Engineering Command had bigger problems. Jet engines were being tested. Rocket-assisted fighters were in development. Resources were finite. A vague complaint about rudder feel from a dozen pilots didn't justify a fleet-wide inspection. But Calloway wasn't working from pilot reports. He was working from wreckage. He'd pulled fabric from 3 separate rudders and examined them under magnification. The tiers always started in the same place, aft of the hinge line, where aerodynamic pressure spiked during yaw. He'd measured cable tension on a dozen aircraft and found variances that shouldn't exist. Some were over-tensioned, some under. None were consistent with maintenance specs. He'd even found microscopic cracks in 2 rudder hinge brackets, invisible to the naked eye, detectable only with a jeweler's loupe and good light. The cracks followed the grain of the aluminum, branching like tree roots. They were early-stage stress fractures. In another 20 hours of flight time, they would propagate, and then the bracket would fail. He brought this to his flight sergeant. The sergeant looked at the fabric samples and shrugged. Wear and tear. Combat is hard on airframes, Calloway insisted. The sergeant told him to log it and move on. He brought it to the station engineering officer. The SEO was a career officer, Cambridge-educated, polite. He listened. He thanked Calloway for his diligence. He reminded him that Supermarine had a team of world-class engineers. If there was a systemic issue, they would have identified it. Calloway asked if anyone had contacted Supermarine. The SEO said that wasn't his concern. Calloway asked if he could request a technical inquiry. The SEO said no. Calloway asked what it would take to get someone to pay attention. The SEO looked at him with tired eyes and said, "A pile of dead pilots, and even then, maybe not." So Calloway went back to the hangar, and he made his choice. He didn't expect to save everyone. He expected to prove a point. If the brace worked, if Hale's Spitfire came back intact after the kind of flying that had killed others, then Calloway would have evidence. Not a report, not a theory, a living, flying, measurable result. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to force a conversation. But 2 days after he installed the brace, the station engineering officer made a surprise inspection. He walked through the hangar with a clipboard and a junior officer in tow, checking maintenance logs and airframe records. Calloway watched from across the floor, pulse hammering. The SEO stopped at QVL. He ran his hand along the fuselage. He crouched by the tail. Calloway felt his chest tighten. The SEO stood, made a note on his clipboard, and moved on. Calloway exhaled. That afternoon, he was summoned to the engineering office. The SEO sat behind a desk cluttered with technical manuals and requisition forms. He didn't look angry, he looked disappointed. He told Calloway that rumors were circulating, talk of unauthorized modifications, freelance engineering. He didn't name names, but he didn't have to. The hangar crew was small. Everyone knew who worked late and who didn't. The SEO said that he understood the impulse, that Calloway's dedication was noted. But the Royal Air Force operated on standards, not intuition. Every modification had to be tested, documented, and approved. Deviation from protocol endangered pilots and compromised airworthiness. He told Calloway, clearly and without room for interpretation, that no further unauthorized work was to be performed. If Calloway had concerns, he was to submit them through proper channels. If he couldn't trust the system, he was free to request a transfer. Calloway said nothing. The SEO asked if he understood. Calloway said, "Yes, sir." The SEO told him he was dismissed. Calloway walked back to the hangar. He didn't remove the brace. He simply stopped installing new ones. He'd made his gamble. Now he had to wait and see if it paid off. 3 days later, Flight Lieutenant Hale led a 4-plane patrol over the channel. The mission was routine: escort a reconnaissance mosquito, watch for enemy fighters, return before dark. The weather was poor: low clouds, intermittent rain, visibility down to 2 miles. 20 minutes into the patrol, radar picked up bogies inbound from the east. 4 contacts, possibly FW-190s. Hale's section broke formation and climbed to intercept. They found the enemy at 12,000 feet, just below the cloud deck. 4 190s flying loose and fast. Hale called the bounce and dove. The first pass was clean. Hale got cannon strikes on a 190's wing route. The German rolled hard and vanished into cloud. Hale's wingman called a break. 2 more 190s were coming around for a head-on pass. Hale pulled into a vertical climb, rolled inverted, and came down behind them. His Spitfire shuddered as he horsed the stick over, snap-rolling into firing position. 420 miles per hour, 5 Gs. The airframe groaned. He fired, missed. The 190 broke left. Hale followed, yanking the stick and stamping rudder to tighten the turn. The Spitfire yawed hard. The rudder bit into the airstream like a knife. Hale felt the plane respond instantly, sharper than usual, cleaner. He stayed on the 190 through 2 full turns, got hits, saw smoke. The German dove for the deck. Hale didn't follow. Fuel was low. The rest of his section was scattered. He called them back into formation and turned for home. On the flight back, he noticed something. The rudder felt solid, no mushiness, no flutter, just crisp, immediate response. He didn't think much of it. He was tired. The adrenaline was fading. He landed, shut down, and climbed out. Calloway was waiting by the wingtip. He didn't say anything, just walked a slow circle around the tail, inspecting the rudder. Hale watched him, confused. Calloway knelt by the hinge, ran his fingers along the fabric, checked the cables, stood and looked at Hale. He told him the plane flew well. Hale said it flew perfect. Calloway nodded and walked away. Over the next 2 weeks, Hale flew 6 more sorties, high-speed intercepts, low-level sweeps. Every flight pushed the Spitfire hard, and every time the rudder held. No flutter, no slop, just flawless control. Other pilots weren't so lucky. On October 3rd, a Spitfire from another squadron lost its rudder during a dogfight and spun into the North Sea. The pilot didn't get out. On October 7th, another came back with the rudder hanging by cables, the fabric shredded. The pilot landed gear up in a field and walked away. The squadron commander ordered an immediate inspection of all Spitfires. Engineers swarmed the flight line, checking tension, measuring tolerances, looking for cracks. They found issues on 11 aircraft, minor but present, cables slightly out of spec, hinges worn beyond recommended limits, fabric showing early signs of delamination. The aircraft were grounded pending repair, except one. QVL passed inspection flawlessly, every measurement perfect, every component within tolerance. The inspecting engineer made a note in the log. Airframe condition exceptional. The squadron commander asked Calloway how the hell that was possible. Calloway said he maintained it well. The commander stared at him, then told him to do the same to every other Spitfire on the line. Calloway said he'd need to make a modification. The commander asked what kind. Calloway explained. A reinforcement brace. Minimal weight, maximum effect. He'd already tested it. It worked. The commander asked if it was authorized. Calloway said, "No, sir." The commander asked if it was safe. Calloway said safer than what they had now. The commander told him to install it on every aircraft by the end of the week. Calloway said, "Yes, sir." Within a month, every Spitfire at RAF Culmhead carried Calloway's brace. The modification was logged. Engineers from Supermarine were notified. They arrived with calipers and cameras, inspected the work, ran stress calculations, and admitted it was sound. More than sound, it was an elegant fix to a problem they hadn't fully recognized. The brace was rolled out to 3 other squadrons, then 6. By December, it was standard retrofit procedure for Spitfire Mark 9s across Fighter Command. Supermarine incorporated a version of it into new production models. No official credit was given, no commendation issued. Calloway's name appeared in maintenance logs and technical bulletins, but never in dispatches or after-action reports. He didn't care. He wasn't interested in medals. He was interested in numbers. Between October and December 1944, the rudder failure rate in Mark 9 Spitfires dropped by 73%. Pilots reported improved control responsiveness, especially in high-speed defensive maneuvers. 3 separate incident reviews attributed aircraft survival directly to the reinforced rudder assembly. Flight Lieutenant Hale flew 19 more combat sorties before the war ended. He survived everyone. He credited luck, training, and a ground crew that kept his plane honest. Years later, in a letter to a historian researching Spitfire engineering, Hale wrote about Calloway. He described him as quiet, methodical, and stubborn. He said Calloway never talked about what he did. He just did it. And when it worked, he moved on to the next problem. Hale wrote that he owed his life to a man who broke the rules because the rules were wrong, and that the war was full of people like that, people whose names never made it into the history books, but whose fingerprints were all over the machines that won. The modification saved at least 9 pilots, probably more. The exact number is unknowable. How do you count the accidents that didn't happen, the crashes that never came, the names that stayed off the casualty lists because a sergeant with a torch and a toolbox decided that being right was more important than being obedient? Eric Calloway left the RAF in 1946. He returned to Coventry and reopened his father's shop. He made parts for textile looms, then later for early automobiles. He married, had 2 daughters, never flew in an aircraft, never spoke much about the war. In 1963, a journalist writing a piece on Spitfire engineering tracked him down, asked him about the rudder modification. Calloway confirmed the basic facts, but declined to be interviewed. He said it wasn't a story, it was just maintenance. The journalist pressed, asked if he ever regretted bypassing the chain of command. Calloway thought for a moment, then said that regret was a luxury. He didn't have time for it in 1944, and he didn't see the point of it now. He died in 1979. His obituary mentioned his service as an RAF airframe fitter. It didn't mention the brace. It didn't mention the pilots. It didn't mention the quiet defiance that turned a hunch into a fleet-wide standard. But the brace is still there, in museums, in restoration projects, in technical manuals archived at the RAF Museum in Hendon. It's a small thing, 2 pounds of aluminum, 6 rivets, a piece of engineering so simple it barely registers as innovation, and yet it saved lives. Not through brilliance, not through heroism, through stubbornness, through the refusal to accept that the way things were done was the only way they could be done. War is often told as a story of great men and great machines. But wars are not won by single moments of genius. They are won by 1,000 small decisions made by people whose names no one remembers, people who see a problem, solve it, and move on without waiting for applause. Eric Calloway was one of those people, a sergeant with grease on his hands and a conviction in his gut, a man who mocked authority not out of arrogance, but out of necessity, a man who understood that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is ignore the order and fix the problem anyway. His legacy isn't a medal or a monument, it's a piece of aluminum riveted to a rudder, and the 9 pilots who came home because of it.